The wine glass shattered the instant he saw the name on the black card. 20 minutes earlier, he'd told that cheap man to eat somewhere else. Now his job, his dignity, and a room full of whispers hang in the balance. The name, Keanu Reeves, about to answer insult with something no one expects. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. Friday nights at the Aurelia always felt like chaos wrapped in gold. Crystal chandeliers gleamed over tables full of influencers, producers, and executives who spoke louder than necessary, as if the world needed to know who they were. Evan Miller weaved through the crowd with a tray balanced in one hand and exhaustion pressed into every muscle of his back. 4 years of this routine had worn grooves into his soul. 4 years of pretending that a smile could cover the resentment bubbling beneath. He'd come to Los Angeles, chasing a dream to one day open his own bistro where food meant connection, not status. But dreams didn't pay rent. Not when a tiny studio apartment near downtown cost more than his monthly salary. So, he told himself this job at the Aurelia was temporary, a stepping stone towards something better. Only, the stone had sunk. He was still here, serving people who didn't see him, and every night that truth hurt a little more. At table 7, a director complained about the temperature of his $400 ribeye. "Too warm," he barked, as though Evan had set it on fire. At table 9, a famous model ordered water that hadn't touched plastic. He fetched her glass bottle from France, and she left without tipping. Then came the manager, his voice sharp, his suit tighter than his patience, reminding Evan to keep the energy up because a celebrity was dining near the window. Evan smiled on command, nodded obediently, then turned away, muttering words he hoped the manager couldn't hear. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was disillusionment. He'd once believed hospitality meant grace, creating comfort through care. But here, it meant servitude. Fake smiles for fake people. Compliments for customers who treated him like furniture. Somewhere along the line, his kindness had calcified into cynicism. Every joke he told to coworkers carried a sting. Every glance toward the next big tip felt like survival, not service. Tonight the resentment was heavier than usual. Rent was overdue. His car needed repairs. His sister had texted that morning asking for help with her medical bill. He hadn't even opened the message. What was he supposed to say? That he barely had enough to buy groceries, let alone save her? The world seemed cruelly tilted, and the people he served were standing at the top, sipping wine while he held the ladder. As the dinner rush reached its peak, Evan leaned against the bar, watching the parade of luxury handbags, designer watches, and hollow laughter. He couldn't remember the last time someone had asked for his name. To them, he was, "Hey, waiter, excuse me." Or worse, completely invisible. The ache of it had become familiar, but tonight it gnawed deeper. He was 28, stuck, broke, and angry at everything he used to love. Then the hostess waved him over. "Table 14, she said. "Single diner, no reservation." Evan sighed, wiping his hands on his apron. Just another customer to tolerate. But when he looked toward the entrance, his eyes caught on the man walking in plain gray t-shirt, worn jeans, no jewelry, no attitude. The kind of customer who didn't belong here. Evan's lip curled before he even realized it. Another lost soul trying to taste luxury on a budget. He didn't know it yet, but that judgment was about to cost him everything. Evan straightened his tie and grabbed a menu, already rehearsing the annoyance he planned to hide behind. A smile. The Aurelia wasn't the kind of place people wandered into. Reservations were made weeks in advance, and regulars arrived in black cars, not old motorcycles parked outside the glass door. The man entering now looked like someone who just finished a long drive through the desert, not someone ready to pay $300 for dinner. "Good evening, sir," Evan began, the words smooth but hollow. "Table for one?" The man nodded politely. "Yes, please. Something quiet, if you don't mind." The voice was calm, low, almost too soft for the noise around them. Evan led him to a small table near the corner, the least visible spot in the dining room. The man thanked him, and Evan caught a faint, genuine smile, one that didn't carry entitlement or impatience. Still, his mind was already labeling the guest. Simple clothes, no watch, no expensive cologne. He'd probably order the cheapest thing on the menu and leave 10% if Evan was lucky. As he set the water glass down, Evan's coworker Tyler passed by and smirked. Another dreamer trying to impress someone? Evan shrugged. Just another night in paradise. He went to the back to fetch a menu and overheard a table of investors laughing about buying property in Beverly Hills. Their laughter was loud, echoing like a cruel soundtrack to his own failures. He tried to tune it out, but couldn't. Their world was built on excess. His was built on endurance. When he returned to table 14, the man was studying the menu with quiet focus. "Would you like to hear tonight's specials?" Evan asked. "Sure," the man replied. Evan went through the usual routine truffle risotto, Chilean sea bass, dry-aged ribeye, all described with careful detail. Each dish was priced like a month of groceries. The man listened patiently, nodding once or twice, then said, "Thank you. I'll just have the burger and water." The words hit Evan like a spark against gasoline. The burger, the cheapest item on the entire menu. He could feel the irritation rise in his chest before he even realized why. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the subtle sense of insult, like the man was wasting his time, sitting here just to pretend he belonged. "Of course," Evan said, keeping his voice polite but tight. "Would you like to add a drink? Perhaps a glass of wine or cocktail?" "No, thank you," the man said kindly. "Water's fine." That smile again, calm, unbothered, impossible to read. It almost disarmed Evan, but pride kept him upright. He turned away, heading toward the kitchen, shaking his head. "Who orders a $70 burger in a place like this?" he muttered to himself. Tyler heard him. "You'd be surprised, man. Some people don't care about the scene. Maybe he just likes burgers." Evan scoffed. "Yeah, or maybe he can't afford anything else." He didn't know it yet, but those words would echo back at him later like thunder. The kitchen clattered behind him as Evan waited for the burger order, his irritation simmering like the oil on the stove. Every order from the dining room meant more stress, more performance. But this one, the plain man in gray, sitting quietly while others flaunted designer suits, felt personal, though Evan couldn't explain why. Maybe because he saw in that man what he feared in himself, someone small, unnoticed, and tired of pretending. "Order up," the chef barked. The burger looked perfect, charred edges, glossy bun, truffle aioli, but Evan barely noticed. He grabbed the plate and headed toward the table. His steps measured, but his mind clouded with judgment. The man looked up as Evan set the plate down. "Thank you," he said gently, voice sincere. "This looks great." Evan nodded without warmth. "Enjoy." He turned away before the words finished leaving his mouth. He didn't want to be drawn in by that tone, too genuine, too calm. It only reminded him how far words. He drifted from the kindness he once valued. At the bar, Maria, the oldest server on staff, was folding napkins with slow, deliberate movements. "You've been frowning since 7 o'clock, she said without looking up. "Just another fake customer," Evan muttered. "Comes to show off in a place like this and orders water. Probably thinks it makes him deep." Maria gave a soft sigh. Maybe he just likes simple things. Not everyone eats to impress. Evan scoffed. "Please, people like that don't belong here." She looked up at him then, her eyes sharp but kind. "Careful, Evan. The moment you start deciding who belongs, you stop serving, and you start judging." The words stung, but he brushed them off. "I'm not judging. I'm just tired of being treated like I don't matter." Maria smiled sadly. "Maybe that's why you should start treating others like they do." Before Evan could respond, another table called out for champagne. He left in a rush, pretending he hadn't heard her. The truth was, her words hit too close to home. Somewhere between tips and bills, he'd started confusing value with money. An hour later, as the dinner crowd began to thin, He glanced across the room at table 14. The man was still there, eating slowly, almost thoughtfully. He wasn't on his phone, wasn't showing off, just enjoying his meal. There was something peaceful about him that didn't fit this place. For a brief second, Evan wondered who he really was. Then he caught sight of the old leather bag beside the man's chair and the scuffed boots peeking beneath the tablecloth. His irritation returned, stronger now. To him, that bag was proof enough. Probably a writer between gigs or an actor clinging to memories of past fame. Whatever the case, this wasn't his kind of customer. Evan turned away with a sigh, unaware that his worst assumption of the night had just been made. The man he dismissed as unimportant was about to teach him the most important lesson of his life. The evening air outside the Aurelia carried a soft chill, the kind that wrapped Los Angeles in a thin haze after sunset. Through the restaurant's tall glass windows, the golden light shimmered across white tablecloths and crystal glasses. Then the front door opened quietly, unnoticed by most. A man stepped inside, not dressed for attention, not styled for photographs. Just a plain gray t-shirt, faded jeans, and an old leather bag slung over his shoulder. Keanu Reeves paused for a moment near the entrance, taking in the warmth of the room. He'd just come from the pediatric wing of St. Mary's Hospital, where he'd spent the afternoon visiting children battling cancer. He had laughed with them, signed autographs, even stayed longer than scheduled to read stories aloud. The smiles had lifted his heart. But now, hours later, he felt emotionally drained. All he wanted was quiet, a meal, and a corner where no one expected him to perform. The hostess greeted him with a polished smile. "Good evening, sir. Do you have a reservation?" Keanu shook his head gently. "No, just me tonight. If you have a small table by the window, that would be perfect." She hesitated for a second. Walk-ins were rare here, but something about his calm presence made her nod. "Of course, right this way." As she led him to the corner table, Evan Miller watched from the bar, irritation already bubbling. Walk-ins meant delays, and delays meant complaints. He didn't recognize the man. To him, this looked like another casual customer who didn't belong in a restaurant where a steak cost half a paycheck. Evan grabbed a menu and forced his practiced grin as he approached. "Good evening, sir," he said, his voice polite but clipped. "Welcome to the Aurelia. May I start you off with sparkling or still water?" "Still, please," Keanu replied with a nod, his tone soft and genuine. Evan handed him the menu and noticed the old bag resting on the floor beside the bride. Chair-worn leather, weathered seams. Not something anyone in this place would carry. He muttered quietly to himself. "Great. Another diner, trying to look rich." Then louder, "Take your time, sir. I'll be right back with your water." He walked away, shaking his head. Behind the bar, Tyler leaned over. "Another big spender?" Evan snorted. "Not likely. Guy looks like he came straight from a laundromat." Tyler smirked. "You never know, man. Some of these low-key types drop big tips." "Sure," Evan said flatly. "And I'm opening my own restaurant next month." He didn't notice that Maria, setting glasses nearby, had been watching quietly. She'd seen that man's face before. Not in person, but in the newspapers stacked by the staff entrance. She didn't say anything. Something told her to wait. Back at table 14, Keanu sat quietly, scanning the menu with the care of someone who actually respected food. His movements were unhurried, his presence gentle. Around him, the world continued to rush clinking silverware, murmured conversations, laughter that sometimes bordered on arrogance. But he seemed untouched by it all, as though peace followed him like a shadow. When Evan returned with a glass of still water, the man was still sitting quietly, the menu untouched beside his folded hands. The candles flickered softly against the window, catching the reflection of his thoughtful expression. Evan set the glass down a little too quickly, forcing a courteous tone. "Would you like to hear tonight's specials, sir?" Keanu looked up, eyes calm but alert. "Yes, please," he said with an easy smile. Evan launched into the memorized routine that he could recite in his sleep. "We're offering a white truffle risotto tonight, paired with imported porcini mushrooms. There's also the Wagyu ribeye, dry-aged 30 days, served with a red wine reduction. Our caviar-topped oysters are a favorite $300 a plate. And for something lighter, the chef recommends the seared Chilean sea bass with saffron beurre blanc. He paused, expecting the man to react with a hint of sticker shock. But Keanu didn't even blink. He nodded once, like he was listening to poetry rather than prices. "Thank you," he said, voice steady. "I think I'll just have the burger and water, please." Evan froze for a heartbeat, forcing his expression to remain neutral. Inside, irritation stirred again. The burger, the absolute cheapest item on the menu, $75 of Wagyu and artisan bread, but still, the cheap choice. It confirmed everything he'd assumed the moment the man walked in. "Of course," he replied, his tone overly polite. "No appetizer? No drink?" Keanu shook his head. "No, thank you. That'll be perfect." There was something almost apologetic about the way he said it. Not defensive, not timid, just quietly certain. Like a man who knew what he wanted and didn't need to prove it to anyone. Evan turned sharply, hiding his annoyance. "Very well," he said, and left. Before he said something he'd regret. At the service station, Tyler caught his eye. "What'd he order?" "The burger," Evan said flatly. Tyler laughed. "You're kidding. Who orders the burger here?" Evan didn't laugh. Apparently he does. He walked toward the kitchen, the frustration clawing at him. The night was busy, and he'd already dealt with 3 high-maintenance tables. One celebrity influencer demanding to see the chef, another customer who'd sent back a bottle of wine after 2 sips, and a third who'd tipped him in cash like they were doing charity work. He didn't need this one, too. When he placed the order with the chef, Antoine raised a brow. "Burger? From your table?" "Yeah," Evan muttered. "Apparently, he's on a budget." The chef frowned. Then, he picked the wrong restaurant. As the order ticket printed, Evan exhaled slowly. He didn't hate the man. He hated what he represented. The simplicity, the calmness, the quiet detachment from everything Evan had been chasing. Back at the table, Keanu took out a small notebook from his leather bag. He began jotting down notes, not on a phone, not distracted, just present. Every few moments he looked up, eyes drifting toward the night skyline beyond the glass. There was something peaceful in the way he sat there, almost too peaceful for a place built on noise and ego. The burger arrived, glistening under the soft light seared Wagyu, melted cheese, toasted brioche. Evan placed it on the table with a professional nod. "Here you go, sir. Enjoy." "Thank you," Keanu said, his tone sincere, almost warm. His eyes met Evan's briefly, steady and kind. It was disarming. There was no hint of irritation, no arrogance, no sense of expectation, just gratitude. Evan stood there for a moment, unsure why he felt suddenly small. He mumbled something polite and hurried away. At the bar, he vented under his breath. $75 for a burger and still no drink. People like him don't belong here. Maria, passing by, paused. "What do you mean, people like him?" "You know people who can't afford this kind of place. They take up space meant for real customers." Maria frowned. "Or maybe he's just someone who doesn't care about showing off." Her words lingered, but Evan ignored them. He glanced back at the table. Keanu was eating slowly, almost meditatively, occasionally writing something in his notebook. No phone, no selfie, just quiet presence. There was something unnervingly grounded about him, a serenity that clashed with the vanity swirling through the restaurant. But all Evan saw was simplicity mistaken for poverty. To him, this man was just another stranger, trying to taste a world he couldn't afford. He didn't notice the detail that would later haunt him, the black card peeking slightly from the old leather bag, the faint engraving of a name that could have changed everything if he had only looked closer. That moment, so ordinary, so forgettable, was the beginning of the night that would shatter everything Evan thought he knew about people, wealth, and himself. The kitchen doors swung open with a rush of noise and heat as Evan stepped inside, the taste of resentment still bitter in his mouth. The clang of pans and the chatter of line cooks filled the air, but his mind was fixed on the man at table 14, the quiet one who'd ordered nothing more than a burger and water like this was some roadside diner. He couldn't let it go. It wasn't just about the order. It was what it represented to him. Another reminder that he was working in a place meant for people who had everything, while he scraped by on tips and patience. Tyler noticed the storm in his coworker's face. "You good, man?" he asked. Evan snorted. "You ever see someone walk into a Ferrari dealership and ask for a bus pass? That's what just happened out there." Tyler chuckled awkwardly. "Come on, he's harmless. Just another guy trying to enjoy dinner." But Evan wasn't laughing. "Burger and water, Tyler. This is the Aurelia. People fly here from Dubai just to post about eating here." And he's sitting in one of the most expensive dining rooms in LA, treating it like a coffee shop. Maria, folding napkins nearby, stopped what she was doing. "You talk too much for someone who doesn't know a thing about people," she said calmly. Evan looked over, irritated. "What's that supposed to mean?" Maria's eyes held steady. "It means not everyone who walks in here owes you a performance. Some people just want peace. You'd be surprised how many folks with real money look like they don't have any." "Yeah?" Evan replied, voice sharp. "And how many of them leave me a real tip?" She sighed softly, shaking her head. "You're missing the point, kid." But Evan was too wound up to hear it. Every bad night, every rude customer, every unpaid bill, all of it blended into the frustration now boiling beneath his skin. He didn't hate the man in gray, he hated what he represented. Back on the floor, the air buzzed with conversation and soft jazz. Keanu sat quietly, the kind of presence that drew no attention until you really looked. The candlelight flickered across his calm features, his focus on the notes he was writing in the small leather notebook beside his plate. Evan watched from across the room, muttering to Tyler, "Burger and water? At Aurelia? Maybe he's lost." Tyler laughed uneasily, not sure if it was safe to agree. "You're gonna jinx yourself, man." "Jinx myself?" Evan smirked. "Only way that guy tips big is if his water comes with a winning lottery ticket." Maria glanced up from the counter, her voice quiet but firm. "Don't judge, Evan. You never know who you're serving." But Evan had stopped listening long ago. He smoothed his apron, fixed his smile, and walked toward table 14, pride leading the way like a blindfold. Evan approached the table with that thin kind of smile people wear when they're hiding irritation. The room buzzed around him, laughter from one corner, the clink of glasses in another. But his focus was fixed on the man in the gray shirt. Keanu was sitting with perfect posture, quiet, composed, the half-eaten burger before him. He looked peaceful, almost too peaceful for a Friday night in a place like this. Evan stopped beside the table and spoke in a tone just a shade too polite. "How's everything tasting, sir?" Keanu looked up, a small, genuine smile softening his face. "It's excellent, thank you." There was no hint of complaint, no need for attention, just gratitude. For some reason, that answer made Evan's irritation spike even more. He couldn't stand how calm the man was, how he didn't play the part of the needy diner or the demanding rich guy. He was just content. Evan tilted his head slightly. "Glad to hear it. You sure you don't want to check out the specials? Most guests find the ribeye or truffle risotto worth the experience." Keanu smiled again. "I'm sure. The burger's perfect." That quiet certainty hit harder than any argument could have. Evan felt a flicker of something he didn't want to name. Embarrassment, maybe, but pride stepped in to cover it. "Well," he said, his tone dipping into something sharper, "if you ever want a cheaper burger, there's a great spot down the street. Less fancy, more casual." The words slipped out, coated in sarcasm before he could pull them back. It was the kind of line meant to sting, meant to remind the customer where they stood. Keanu's eyes lifted, steady and clear. For a second, Evan saw something shift in them, not anger, not surprise, but recognition, a quiet awareness that went deeper than pride or insult. "I think I'll stay," Keanu said softly. 4 words, calm, controlled, and somehow more powerful than a shout. Evan froze for half a heartbeat, caught off guard by the man's composure. There was no glare, no tension, just restraint kind, deliberate restraint that made him feel suddenly foolish. "Of course," Evan said quickly, his practiced smile snapping back into place. "Enjoy your meal." He turned before Keanu could respond, retreating with his tray held tight against his chest. As he walked away, something in his chest tightened, a strange mix of guilt and defiance he couldn't shake. At the bar, Tyler asked, "Everything okay at 14? Evan forced a smirk. "Yeah, fine." "Guess the guy likes pretending he belongs here." Maria, polishing a glass, glanced up. "Or maybe he doesn't have to pretend." Evan didn't respond. He didn't want to think about what that meant. He went back to folding napkins, muttering under his breath about cheap customers wasting tables, trying to drown out the echo of that calm voice saying, "I think I'll stay." For the next half hour, Evan tried to shake it off, but that single moment replayed in his mind like a needle stuck in a groove. The quiet firmness of Keanu's voice, the patience in his groove. It wasn't what Evan expected. People usually fought back, complained, or called for the manager. This man had done none of that. Instead, he'd shown a kind of grace that made Evan's pettiness feel naked under the restaurant's soft light. Still, pride wouldn't let him stop. Every time he passed the corner table, he found himself looking for flaws to justify what he'd said. Maybe the man ate too slowly. Maybe he looked out of place. Maybe he really was just pretending. Anything to make himself feel right. Tyler noticed. "You're still thinking about that guy, huh?" Evan shrugged, trying to sound casual. "He's taking up one of my best tables for a $90 tab. I've got a party waiting that'll order $2,000 in wine. You tell me who should be sitting there." "Maybe the one who got here first," Tyler said, half joking but half serious. Evan didn't answer. He looked across the room again. Keanu was nearly done with his meal, now sipping water as he gazed out the window. The city lights shimmered against the glass, and for a moment, he looked like someone miles away in thought. Maria came over quietly, placing a tray down beside Evan. "You've got to stop letting other people's peace bother you so much." He looked at her, frowning. "What's that supposed to mean?" She smiled faintly. "You act like his calmness is an insult. Maybe it's just who he is. Some people don't need noise to feel comfortable." He laughed dryly. "Or maybe he doesn't care enough to pretend he belongs." Maria didn't argue. She just shook her head and went back to work. Her silence said more than words could. The rest of the night blurred into the rhythm of clinking cutlery and murmured voices, but Evan's energy had shifted. Each time he crossed the floor, he caught glimpses of Keanu's quiet demeanor, thanking the busboy for refilling his glass, smiling at the hostess as she passed, nodding at another guest who accidentally bumped his chair. He carried himself like someone who belonged anywhere, not because of status, but because of ease. And that, more than anything, irritated Evan the most. When Keanu finally finished his burger, he folded his napkin neatly and waited for the check. Evan pretended not to see him for a minute, caught between guilt and ego. Then he finally picked up the bill folder and walked toward the table, his thoughts a storm of frustration, envy, and confusion he didn't yet understand. In a few minutes, that storm would break, and nothing about this night, or about Evan's life, would ever look the same again. The noise inside the Aurelia was relentless. Forks clinked against porcelain, champagne fizzed in tall glasses, and laughter rose from tables where wealth was a performance, and noise was proof of importance. In the midst of all that, one table stood out not for its spectacle, but for its silence. Keanu sat with quiet posture, shoulders relaxed, movements unhurried. His meal arrived exactly as he'd asked, and for the next several minutes, he simply ate. Each motion carried a stillness that drew contrast to everything around him. He didn't scroll his phone. He didn't look around to see who noticed him. He just took small, thoughtful bites, chewing slowly, almost reverently, as though the meal were an act of gratitude rather than consumption. Every so often, his gaze drifted toward the window, where the reflections of city lights flickered across the glass. Los Angeles glowed beyond it, the same city that had both made and scarred him. Fame had followed him since he was young, but belonging had never come with it. He'd spent decades surrounded by rooms just like this one, rooms full of people performing success like a play with no ending. For Keanu, simplicity wasn't rebellion, it was survival. At the service counter, Evan muttered bitterly to Tyler while refilling a pitcher. "You ever notice how the cheap ones take their time? He's probably counting the bites so he can justify sitting here for 2 hours." Tyler chuckled awkwardly but didn't respond. He'd learned when to let Evan's sarcasm burn itself out. Maria passed by, her pace unhurried, her eyes flicking toward the corner table. She'd seen enough over the years to recognize when someone didn't fit the usual pattern. There was a gentleness in the man's demeanor that felt out of place here, an awareness she couldn't quite explain. She refilled his water quietly, expecting the standard silence or a distracted nod. But instead, Keanu looked up. "Thank you, ma'am," he said, softly. The words caught her off guard. No one called her ma'am in this place. Not the influencers, not the moguls, not the spoiled heirs who couldn't remember her name. The respect in his tone wasn't rehearsed, it was real. "You're welcome," she replied, a small smile forming before she realized it. For a brief second, their eyes met hers, tired but kind, his calm and steady. Something unspoken passed between them, a moment of human recognition in a place built on hierarchy. Then she turned to go, hiding the warmth spreading through her chest. From across the room, Evan saw the exchange. His frown deepened. "She's wasting time on him," he muttered. "He's not going to tip." Tyler glanced up from polishing glasses. "She's just doing her job." Evan scoffed. "Yeah, well, she's been doing it too long. You start being nice to everyone, you forget who pays your rent." But deep down, something about the scene unsettled him. He couldn't articulate why, but that man's quiet presence felt like a mirror held up to his worst instincts, and he didn't like the reflection. The night deepened, and the Aurelia pulsed with energy. Servers moved like clockwork, weaving through aisles of laughter and excess. Yet, amid the noise, Keanu's table remained an island of calm. His every movement carried intention, the way he folded his napkin neatly after each bite, the way he lifted the glass with both hands, as though honoring the moment. There was no rush, no performance. Maria noticed from afar. Every so often she found herself glancing at him, wondering who he really was. There was something hauntingly familiar in the way he sat, humble posture, weary kindness, the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. She refilled his water again, this time slower, more mindful. "Everything all right, sir?" she asked softly. Keanu nodded. "Perfect. You all work hard here," he said, his voice low but sincere. "It shows." She blinked, taken aback by the acknowledgement. Most guests at the Aurelia barely saw the staff, let alone praised them. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly, her throat tightening a little. "You're welcome," Keanu replied. "You remind me of people I used to work with, the ones who actually cared about what they did." Maria smiled faintly, then excused herself before her emotions showed. At the other end of the floor, Evan rolled his eyes. "You see that?" he said to Tyler. "He's charming her now. These types always do that. They act nice so you forget they're wasting your table." Tyler sighed. "Man, why do you care so much?" "Because he's sitting in a prime spot," Evan snapped. "You think we're paid for patience? I've got a group of investors waiting and this guy's chewing a burger like it's a sermon." "Maybe you could learn something from that," Tyler muttered. Evan didn't hear, or pretended not to. He was too focused on what he saw as an injustice. A simple man in a gray t-shirt, occupying the table where, in his mind, only the rich belonged. Keanu, unaware of the tension his presence stirred, continued his meal with quiet gratitude. Each bite seemed to ground him, each sip of water an act of grace. He wasn't thinking about the menu prices, the designer suits, or the stares he could feel from across the room. He was thinking about the children he'd met earlier that day. The girl who'd asked if he ever got scared before going on camera. The boy who'd said he wanted to make movies but didn't believe anyone would care. He thought of their bravery, their fragility. Compared to that, this restaurant, this world of pretended importance, felt weightless. He smiled faintly, half amused, half sad. When he reached for the napkin to wipe his hands, Maria noticed again how his gestures carried both exhaustion and peace, like someone who'd seen enough of life to understand what really mattered. In that quiet corner of the Aurelia, between the soft jazz and the hum of indulgence, humility had taken a seat, and not one person, except Maria, recognized it. The restaurant had begun to slow. The laughter softened. The clinking of glasses faded to a low hum. Keanu's table, untouched by the chaos, seemed to glow in the dim light. He finished the last bite of his burger, folded his napkin neatly, and looked out at the city once more. For a moment, his reflection in the glass blended with the skyline, a quiet man among towers of noise. Maria passed by one final time, collecting plates. "Thank you again, sir," she said warmly. Keanu nodded. "No," he said, with that same gentle steadiness. "Thank you." The words carried weight, not flattery. Maria felt them settle in her chest. She gave a small nod before walking away, blinking faster than usual. At the counter, Evan muttered, "Unbelievable. He's thanking her like she did him a favor." Tyler looked at him. "Maybe she did." Evan didn't respond. His eyes lingered on Keanu's table as the man gathered his things. The old leather bag, the simple clothes, the quiet dignity, it all irritated him for reasons he couldn't explain. To him, this man was out of place, too ordinary for this world of polished perfection. Keanu rose from his chair, smoothing the wrinkles in his shirt. He placed his wallet gently on the table, waiting patiently for the check. The movement was effortless, almost graceful, as though every gesture carried respect for the moment itself. Evan sighed, grabbed the bill folder, and started toward him. His thoughts churned about bills, about failure, about pride. He didn't realize the ground was already shifting beneath him. In a few seconds, the simplest act, a man paying for his meal, would unravel every assumption Evan had built his life around. Evan approached table 14 with the check in hand, his mind already miles ahead. The night was nearly over. He was thinking about the tables that mattered, the ones with money, influence, or at least the decency to tip big. This wasn't one of them. The man in the gray shirt was polite enough, sure, but polite didn't pay rent. He set the bill on the edge of the table with the usual line, "Whenever you're ready, sir." Keanu looked up, gave a soft nod, and smiled. "Thank you," he said. There was something about the way he said it earnest, almost grateful, that unsettled Evan. It didn't fit. People usually ignored him or mumbled without meeting his eyes. This man spoke like every word mattered. Evan brushed it off and turned to check on another table, already assuming what would happen next. The man would pull out some old card, pay for his burger and water, leave 10% at best, and disappear. Another forgettable customer in a long list of them. Behind him, Keanu reached for his wallet. The leather looked aged, the kind that carried years of travel and quiet stories. From it, he slid out a card, matte black, metallic edges gleaming under the candlelight. He placed it gently on the tray, face down, and folded the receipt holder closed. When Evan returned, he scooped up the tray without looking. Habit, disinterest. His mind was already replaying Maria's words from earlier, the ones he pretended not to care about. "Don't judge, kid. You never know who you're serving." He rolled his eyes as he walked to the payment counter. "Yeah, sure," he muttered under his breath. "And maybe next time it's the president ordering a burger." He reached the terminal and flipped the card over, ready to swipe. The world seemed to stop. The name, etched clean in silver against the black titanium, burned into his vision. He blinked once, twice, his throat suddenly dry. Keanu Reeves. The letters didn't just register, they hit him. He froze, staring, unable to move. His first thought was that it had to be fake. Some fan with a novelty card, maybe. But the weight in his hand told him otherwise. The real black titanium kind wasn't something anyone could fake. His pulse kicked hard against his ribs. His stomach turned. His breath caught halfway between disbelief and panic. His mind replayed everything at once: the smirk, the mockery, the cheap burger comment, the condescension. Every careless word now echoed like a hammer striking metal. He turned his head toward table 14. Keanu was there, standing now, slipping on his jacket, calm as ever. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't angry. He was just still. And somehow, that stillness terrified Evan more than if he'd shouted. Evan's hands began to shake. The card felt heavier now, like it carried the weight of every bad decision he had made that night. His mouth was dry, but the restaurant suddenly felt too warm. He stared at the machine, trying to steady his fingers long enough to insert the chip. They wouldn't stop trembling. "Hey, you good?" Tyler asked, leaning from behind the counter. Evan didn't look up. Yeah, fine." His voice came out hoarse, nothing like his usual sharp tone. Tyler frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Evan swallowed hard. "Something like that." He ran the transaction, watching the screen flash approved. The machine beeped innocently, unaware that it had just witnessed the most humiliating moment of his life. He slipped the receipt into the black folder, but his grip on the pen faltered. The thought struck him like a slap. Keanu Reeves had been sitting in his section the entire time. The man he'd mocked, the man he'd judged, the man he'd told to eat at a cheaper place. The realization made him dizzy. He replayed every detail: the gray shirt, the old leather bag, the calm smile. It all fit. The simplicity wasn't carelessness, it was choice. Keanu Reeves didn't need to prove anything to anyone, and Evan, blinded by bitterness, had treated him like an inconvenience. His chest tightened. He looked across the dining room again. Keanu was still by the table, putting his wallet back in his bag. He moved like someone unhurried, almost serene. Around him, the room continued in its rhythm, servers weaving, glasses clinking, customers laughing. But to Evan, everything had gone silent. Maria approached from behind, noticing the color draining from his face. "Evan? What's wrong?" He turned the card slightly, enough for her to see the engraved name. Her eyes widened, her hand instinctively covering her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Evan couldn't speak. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Maria looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head softly. "I told you, kid, you never know who you're serving." Her words struck deeper than before. He forced himself to take a breath and walk back toward the table, though each step felt heavier than the last. His mind screamed for a way to fix it, to undo the sneer, the sarcasm, the arrogance. But there was no going back. Some mistakes were loud, others were quiet, but their echoes stayed forever. As he approached, Keanu slipped his arms through the sleeves of his jacket. He looked up briefly, his expression unreadable. No anger, no judgment, just quiet awareness. Evan opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. Keanu simply nodded once, an acknowledgement that somehow felt both forgiving and final. Then he turned slightly toward the exit. Evan stood frozen, the receipt folder in his shaking hands, knowing that a single act of kindness from the man he'd insulted would haunt him more than any punishment ever could. Evan stood there, unable to move, the black titanium card still burning in his palm. The letters of Keanu's name seemed to glow under the soft restaurant light, like a brand pressed into his conscience. He wanted to vanish. Every mocking word he had said, now replayed louder than the clinking dishes or the chatter around him. Burger and water? Maybe he's lost. You'd be more comfortable at a cheaper place. Each phrase hit him like a hammer. His throat tightened as he forced himself to take a breath and step closer. He laid the receipt folder gently on the table, his hands visibly trembling. "Thank you, sir," he managed to say. His voice cracked halfway through. Keanu looked up at him. His eyes were calm, deep, and steady, the kind that saw more than they let on. He reached for the folder and took out the pen. Without breaking eye contact, he signed the receipt, left the pen inside, and set it down carefully. Evan tried to speak again, to apologize, but his voice died before it could take shape. He stood there, gripping the edge of the table, as Keanu slid the card back into his wallet. "Thank you for dinner," Keanu said softly. The words weren't laced with irony or reproach. They were simple and kind, too kind. He picked up his leather bag, draped his jacket over one arm, and gave a small nod before walking toward the exit. No manager, no scene, just quiet grace. Evan watched him go, frozen in place. The door opened, letting in a soft gust of night air as Keanu disappeared into the street. For a moment, everything inside, the Aurelia, went still. The sounds returned slowly, distant and blurred, like the world had to remember how to move again. Maria came up beside him, resting a gentle hand on his arm. "Let it sink in," she said. "That's what humility looks like." Evan didn't answer. His eyes fell to the receipt, still on the table. A single number glared up at him, $500. The tip. He sank into the chair Keanu had just vacated, the leather still warm. His thoughts were a blur of shame, awe, and disbelief. It wasn't the money that left him shaking, it was the message. Kindness, given where it wasn't deserved, carried more power than anger ever could. He covered his face with both hands. He'd spent years serving luxury, yet he had never once served someone like this. A man whose wealth wasn't in what he owned, but in how he treated people. For the first time in a long while, Evan felt small in the best possible way. Not humiliated, but humbled. And as the noise of the restaurant returned around him, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This night would follow him for the rest of his life. Evan stumbled back toward the register, his legs barely steady beneath him. The receipt folder still trembled in his hands as he clutched it like proof of some terrible crime. He placed the card down by the payment terminal and stared at it again, half hoping the name would change, but it didn't. It stayed there, crisp and undeniable, engraved in silver letters that seemed to burn through him. Keanu Reeves. He ran the card through again, watching the display flash with confirmation, and his stomach turned. The letters on the receipt reappeared, the signature beneath them, elegant and simple, no flourish, no title, no demand for recognition. Just that name, clean and humble. Maria leaned over his shoulder. "What's wrong? You look pale." Evan's lips parted, but his voice came out in fragments. "Maria, it's him." She frowned, confused, then followed his gaze to the card. The moment her eyes registered the name, she gasped softly. "Oh my God, you didn't." Evan's silence was answer enough. The realization spread across her face like a slow, sinking wave. "You mocked him?" she whispered. His throat closed. The air in the restaurant seemed to disappear. Every sound, the chatter, the clinking glasses, the faint jazz faded into a single high-pitched hum in his ears. He could feel his pulse pounding at his temples. Maria touched his arm. "Evan, say something." He shook his head slowly, his voice breaking. "I told him to eat at a cheaper place." The words hung between them, sharp and unforgiving. Maria closed her eyes. "Oh, Evan." He pressed a hand over his mouth, his breathing unsteady. The full weight of what he'd done hit him all at once. Keanu Reeves, the man known for giving up his seat on subways, for donating millions to children's hospitals, for treating janitors like equals, was the man he had belittled. The room seemed to tilt. He reached for the counter to steady himself, but his hand knocked over a half-full glass. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound cracking through the restaurant like a gunshot. Heads turned instantly. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clatter of the glass seemed to hang in the air, echoing longer than it should have. Tyler rushed over from the other end of the bar. "Evan, what happened?" Evan couldn't answer. His eyes were locked across the room. At table 14, Keanu had turned. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He just looked calm, collected, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the space, and in that instant, Evan felt completely seen. Not by a celebrity, not by a customer, but by a man who knew exactly what had just broken inside him. The sound of breaking glass carried through the restaurant like thunder. The room, moments ago alive with laughter and soft jazz, fell into an uneasy silence. Every pair of eyes turned toward the bar where Evan stood, frozen, shards glittering at his feet. The color had drained from his face, his breathing shallow, his heart hammering in his ears. The manager, Vincent, stormed out from the back, his face flushed. "What on earth is going on here?" he snapped. "Evan, are you all right?" Evan tried to answer, but his voice came out in a whisper. "It's him." Vincent frowned. "Who?" He couldn't look up. His gaze stayed fixed on the black titanium card still resting near the register. The man at table 14. Vincent followed his stare, reading the name printed in metallic lettering. The reaction was immediate. His eyes widened slightly, his jaw tightening as understanding hit him. "You're kidding," Vincent muttered under his breath. "You mean?" Evan nodded weakly. Vincent straightened, looking toward the far corner of the room. Keanu Reeves was standing now, his jacket over one arm, waiting patiently for the commotion to settle. He wasn't making a scene. He wasn't scolding anyone. He simply stood there, still as stone, watching. The kind of stillness that silenced the noise better than shouting ever could. "Clean it up," Vincent said quietly to Maria. Then, lowering his voice, he added, "And for God's sake, someone apologize to that man before this place ends up in the news." But even as he spoke, Keanu stepped forward, closing the distance between them with slow, unhurried strides. Evan couldn't move, his throat constricted, his mind spinning. Each step Keanu took felt like a mirror held closer, showing him everything ugly he'd tried to hide. Behind sarcasm and pride, Keanu stopped just short of the shattered glass. He looked at Evan, then at the card still on the counter, then back at Evan again. "You dropped something," he said softly. The tone wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was almost gentle. Evan swallowed hard, bending quickly to gather the broken pieces of glass. His fingers trembled as he picked them up, the sharp edges cutting faintly into his skin. "I'm sorry," he managed to whisper. "I didn't know," Keanu's voice interrupted, quiet but firm. "That's the point." Evan froze, the words hitting harder than any reprimand could have. He looked up. Keanu's eyes held a calm gravity, a mix of disappointment and compassion that made him want to disappear. For a moment, the world around them blurred, the laughter, the whispers, the flickering lights, all fading into the background. There was only the truth standing between them. Keanu's gaze softened. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Just remember that next time." Then, without another word, he turned and walked toward the door. Keanu reached the door as the entire restaurant stood still. No one dared to speak. The soft chiming of the entry bell was the only sound that followed him into the night. He didn't look back, didn't make a scene, didn't even seem angry. His calmness was a mirror of control, something Evan couldn't understand but instantly respected. For a long moment, no one moved. "It could have been anyone," she said quietly, "but maybe it had to be him." Evan didn't answer. His hands still shook, blood rising from a shallow cut on his palm where the glass had sliced him. He didn't even feel it. His thoughts were miles away, flashes of Keanu's eyes, that quiet voice, those 4 words, "That's the point." Vincent dismissed the staff back to their duties, but the energy in the room never recovered. The usual buzz of chatter returned faintly, awkwardly. Everyone sensed that something meaningful had just unfolded in their presence, something they couldn't quite define. Evan stood at the counter, staring at the card machine's display, where the last transaction still glowed faintly on the screen. $592.50. The burger, the water, and a $500 tip. He wanted to erase it, but he couldn't. It was carved into his memory now. He wiped his hands on his apron and looked toward the door, wishing he could go after Keanu, say something, anything, but what was there left to say? An apology wouldn't erase the words he'd spoken. It wouldn't change the way he'd looked at him, the assumptions he'd made. Maria broke the silence. "He gave you grace, Evan. You should be thankful. Some people would have ruined you for that." He nodded slowly, voice quiet. "He could have humiliated me in front of everyone. He didn't. That's what makes it worse," she said softly. He understood what she meant. Kindness from someone you've wronged has a way of burning deeper than anger ever could. It leaves you exposed, stripped of your defenses. Evan leaned against the counter, the weight of shame settling heavy in his chest. He'd spent years thinking he could read people, but tonight proved he didn't know the first thing about seeing them. He glanced at the floor, where the last tiny shard of glass still caught the light like a reminder. In its reflection, he saw himself, not the version that smiled for tips, not the one who blamed the world for his struggle, but the man he'd become through bitterness and pride. He didn't like what he saw. As the restaurant lights dimmed for closing, Maria placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go home, Evan. Sleep. Tomorrow, start over." He nodded numbly. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't sleep. Not tonight. Not after watching a man he mocked walk out with more grace and silence than he'd ever shown in his entire life. Before Keanu reached the door, Evan found his voice. Or maybe what was left of it. The sound came out strangled, desperate. "Mr. Reeves, wait." Keanu stopped, turning slightly, his expression still composed. Evan took a shaky step forward, his apron brushing against the broken glass. He didn't care. His heart felt like it was pounding in his throat. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't know," Evan stammered. "It's just I thought." Keanu's gaze softened, and he shook his head once. "You didn't have to know." The simplicity of it froze Evan mid-sentence. There was no accusation, no anger, just the quiet truth of it. Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his wallet again. He handed the receipt folder back toward Evan, who noticed his hand didn't shake at all. Calm, steady, almost patient. Evan's fingers trembled as he took it. "Sir, please, you don't have to." Keanu placed the card back inside the folder with a subtle finality that ended the argument before it began. "It's already done," he said gently. He nodded once toward the manager, who had appeared behind the bar, looking both mortified and speechless. Then Keanu looked back at Evan. "Everyone has bad days. Just don't let them make you smaller." Evan blinked, confusion and shame twisting inside him. "Why would you tip me?" he asked quietly. "After I was rude to you." Keanu's lips curved into a half-smile. "Because kindness isn't a reward," he said. "It's a choice." The words landed with a weight Evan couldn't bear. He wanted to apologize again, to explain the exhaustion, the rent, the bitterness. But Keanu's calm expression told him he already knew. The man didn't need reasons. He understood people better than they understood themselves. Keanu reached for his worn leather bag, the same one Evan had mocked moments earlier, and slung it over his shoulder. His movements were quiet, deliberate. Then, before turning toward the door again, he said softly, "Take care of yourself." He left the folder on the counter and walked out without another word. The door closed behind him with a faint chime, the kind that marked not just an exit but the end of something important. For a full minute, no one moved. The dining room was utterly silent. Even the soft jazz playing in the background seemed to pause out of respect. Vincent, the manager, finally stepped forward and picked up the receipt folder Keanu had left behind. He opened it slowly, reading the total. His eyebrows lifted slightly. $500, he murmured, almost to himself. He looked up at Evan, who stood motionless, his face pale and eyes glassy. "Maria," from across the room, whispered under her breath. "That's Keanu Reeves for you." Grace under fire. Evan stared at the receipt in Vincent's hand, as though it were a confession of guilt written in ink. The $500 tip stood there like a mirror reflecting everything he wasn't. He wanted to say something, to explain what had happened, but the words wouldn't come. The staff nearby stayed silent, waiting, the air thick with disbelief. Vincent finally placed the folder on the counter and exhaled slowly. "I've managed restaurants for 20 years, he said under his breath, "but I've never seen anything like that." Maria walked closer, her expression soft. "That's not just generosity," she said quietly. "That's grace." Evan rubbed the back of his neck, shame pressing down hard on his chest. He couldn't look anyone in the eye. Every moment from earlier replayed like a cruel film, the sneer, the joke, the sideways glances, and all the while, Keanu had sat there quietly, meeting every insult with patience. Vincent broke the silence again. "Evan, go sit down for a minute." He didn't argue. His knees felt weak. He sank onto the nearest chair, staring at the floor where the last shard of glass still glinted faintly. The sound of it breaking. replayed in his mind again and again the sound of his arrogance shattering in front of everyone. Maria approached and handed him a wet towel. "Here," she said softly. "You're shaking." He took it, grateful for something to do with his hands. "I don't get it," he whispered. "I humiliated him." "Why would he?" His voice trailed off. Maria smiled sadly. "Because that's the kind of man he is. He doesn't give kindness because you earn it. He gives it because he believes in it." Evan swallowed hard. "I wish I could take it back." "You can't," she said gently. "But you can carry it forward." Across the room, one of the younger servers whispered to another, "Was that really him? The guy from the movies?" Vincent turned toward them, his tone quiet but firm. "It doesn't matter who he is. What matters is how we treated him." The words sank into everyone like a slow echo. No one spoke after that. The restaurant, once filled with laughter and clinking glasses, now felt like a chapel, solemn, reflective. Evan ran his fingers through his hair, exhaling shakily. He thought about all the stories he'd heard over the years. Keanu paying for crew members' college tuitions, giving up his seat on crowded trains, quietly donating millions without ever mentioning it. And he, Evan Miller, had looked that man in the eye and assumed the worst. He stood suddenly, needing air. The room felt too small for the weight he carried. As he moved toward the door, Maria called softly after him, "Evan, don't run from it. Learn from it." He nodded without looking back. "I will," he said quietly. "I swear I will." Outside, the cool night air hit Evan like a wave. The street was quiet now, a soft hum of traffic in the distance, neon signs flickering faintly across the boulevard. He stepped onto the sidewalk, scanning left and right, hoping to catch even a glimpse of Keanu. But the man was gone. Just as quietly as he had arrived, he had vanished into the Los Angeles night. Evan stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty street. The breeze carried the faint smell of the ocean mixed with car exhaust, grounding him in a reality that suddenly felt heavier. He had waited years for a big break, for someone influential to notice him, to see potential in him. And when it finally happened, he'd been too blinded by pride to recognize it. He walked to the edge of the curb and sat down on a low stone planter, running his hands over his face. Everything about the night replayed in cruel detail. The cheap jokes, the disdain in his tone, the way Keanu had looked up at him with calm eyes that didn't fight back. And then, that final moment. You didn't have to know. Evan felt a sting at the corner of his eyes, but he didn't fight it. The tears came slowly, not from embarrassment anymore, but from the ache of understanding. It wasn't about fame or status or the kind of customer he had insulted. It was about character, the kind he hadn't shown. Behind him, the door opened. Maria stepped out, her jacket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She approached quietly and stood beside him. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. Finally, she said, "You know, most people wouldn't have stopped him. You did." He gave a weak laugh. "Yeah, to make things worse." She shook her head. "No, to try. That's something." He turned toward her. "He looked right at me, Maria, like he could see everything I've been hiding, every time I've judged someone, every moment I've thought I was better, and he still forgave me." Maria sighed softly. "That's what grace does. It shows you what you could be if you let go of your pride." They stood there in silence again, the hum of the city growing faint in the distance. Evan thought about the receipt, the $500 tip, and the words Keanu had left him with. Kindness isn't a reward, it's a choice. When Maria finally went back inside, Evan stayed where he was, staring at the darkened street. For the first time in years, the bitterness inside him cracked open, and something real took its place. A quiet determination to change. He whispered to himself, "Next time, I'll be the one choosing kindness." Back inside, the restaurant had resumed its rhythm. but a strange stillness lingered, like everyone knew they had witnessed something rare. Vincent held the signed receipt one last time before locking it away in the safe. "It's not a bill," he said quietly to no one in particular. "It's a lesson." The next morning, the Aurelia looked the same from the outside: sleek windows, gold lettering, and the faint hum of breakfast prep inside. But to Evan, everything felt different. The moment he stepped through the back door, every sound was louder. Every glance from a coworker lingered a little longer. He could feel it. The story had spread within the staff, whispered in break rooms and text threads overnight. Vincent, the manager, spotted him immediately. "Evan, office." Those two words hit harder than he expected. He followed Vincent into the narrow room at the back of the kitchen, where a stack of receipts sat on the desk like quiet witnesses. The door closed behind them with a soft click. Vincent leaned back in his chair, arms folded. "I'm not going to fire you," he said after a pause. "But I should." Evan's stomach turned. He looked down at his hands, waiting. "You embarrassed this restaurant last night," Vincent continued. "You embarrassed yourself. But more than that, you embarrassed someone who didn't deserve it." He took a breath. "And yet, he showed us more dignity than any of us did." Evan nodded slowly. "I know," he whispered. Vincent studied him for a moment. "Do you?" Evan hesitated. "I thought I did. But last night?" His voice cracked. "Last night, I saw what real character looks like." Vincent's expression softened slightly. "Good, because I think that man taught all of us something." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "You're not fired, Evan, but I want you to take a few days off. Think about who you want to be when you walk back in here. Not as a waiter, but as a person." Evan nodded again, barely able to speak. "Thank you," he managed. Vincent gestured toward the door. "Go home, clear your head. Don't waste what that man gave you." Outside, the sun hit hard and bright against the pavement. Evan stood on the sidewalk, the memory of Keanu's calm face still etched behind his eyes. He didn't feel relieved about keeping his job. He felt small. He felt exposed. At a nearby cafe, he ordered a coffee and sat by the window, staring at nothing. His phone buzzed once, then twice. By the third notification, he picked it up. The first headline made his heart stop. "Keanu Reeves dines humbly at LA restaurant, leaves massive tip." There were photos, grainy, taken from another table but clear enough to show him. Keanu in his gray shirt and old leather bag, smiling faintly at the waitress who'd brought him water. The article was already going viral. Every comment section was filled with praise, admiration, stories of Keanu's kindness. Evan's name wasn't there. No one mentioned the rude waiter. But he didn't need to see it in print. He already knew. Evan scrolled through the article in silence. Each sentence felt like a slow punch to the chest. Keanu Reeves spotted at the Aurelia in Los Angeles. Ordered a simple burger and water. Left a $500 tip. Witnesses say he was polite, humble, and thanked every staff member. There was even a blurry picture of Maria smiling beside him. She hadn't asked for it, but someone at another table had snapped it. The image radiated warmth, the kind that no filter could fake. Keanu looked peaceful, like a man who found grace in being ordinary. Evan stared at that photo for a long time. His reflection glimmered faintly on the screen, overlapping with Keanu's calm face. He looked nothing like the man who'd served him. That man had been bitter, quick to judge, desperate to feel powerful for 5 seconds in a world that made him feel small. His phone buzzed again, text messages from coworkers. "Dude, it's everywhere. Maria, don't read the comments. Just take this as a lesson." He didn't reply. He couldn't. He set the phone face down and pressed his palms over his eyes. In his mind, he kept hearing Keanu's voice. "You didn't have to know." Those 4 words looped, like a melody he couldn't turn off. It wasn't just that he disrespected a famous man. It was that he disrespected someone human, someone who'd shown up quietly, treated him with courtesy, and asked for nothing but a simple meal. He'd lost sight of why he'd ever come into this line of work. When he'd first started, Evan loved people. He'd loved the conversations, the laughter, the connection that came with serving someone something good. But over time, rent and exhaustion had stripped that joy away. He'd started seeing people as transactions, not stories. And last night, he'd seen it cost him something deeper than a job. It had cost him part of himself. He sat there for nearly an hour, staring out at the street. People passed by carrying coffee cups and grocery bags, lost in their own worlds. For the first time in years, he wondered how many of them were fighting quiet battles behind their eyes. How many had been judged unfairly? How many were kind, despite not being seen? When he finally stood, his reflection in the cafe window startled him. He looked older, not from years, but from the weight of realization. He walked aimlessly through downtown, the city humming around him. The noise, the crowds, the luxury cars, it all felt hollow now. Every bit of arrogance he'd carried seemed to crumble with each step. As he passed a bus stop, he noticed a man sitting on the curb holding a paper cup. Evan paused, met his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, really saw someone. Without thinking, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a 20, and placed it gently in the cup. The man's smile was small but real. "Thank you," he said. Evan nodded. "No," he whispered. "Thank you." That night, Evan lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his small apartment. The city lights filtered through the blinds, faint and restless. Every few seconds, he saw Keanu's calm eyes in his mind, steady, unshaken, forgiving. He thought about the years he'd spent resenting people with money, assuming kindness was a luxury only the rich could afford. But now he knew better. Kindness cost nothing, yet he'd been too broke in spirit to give it. Tears slipped down the sides of his face before he even realized he was crying. It wasn't just guilt, it was grief for the person he'd become. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost his humanity, traded it for cynicism and survival. He whispered into the dark, "I'll do better." The next morning, the headlines were still trending, but Evan didn't open them. He didn't need to. The story wasn't about fame or money, it was about humility, and how a man with everything reminded him what it meant to be human. For the first time in years, he felt something shift deep inside him. Not just regret, but resolve. And though his heart was heavy, it was finally beating in the right direction. A few days later, Evan found himself standing outside a red brick building downtown. The sign above the door read, Hope Haven Community Kitchen. The air smelled faintly of roasted vegetables and soap. Inside, the faint hum of voices mixed with the clatter of pans and laughter. He hesitated before stepping in. Volunteering hadn't been part of his plan. He didn't even know why he'd agreed when Maria had suggested it. But something about her words, "Don't run from it, learn from it," had stuck. He'd spent too long serving the privileged. Maybe it was time to serve people who actually needed it. A woman at the front desk smiled as he entered. "First time volunteering?" "Yeah," Evan said, rubbing the back of his neck. "I'm not sure I'm good at this," the woman chuckled. "Good isn't the point. Compassion is. Grab an apron, and we'll start you with serving trays." He slipped on an old apron and followed her into the kitchen. The air was warm, filled with the smell of broth, garlic, and bread. People moved with quiet purpose, handing out bowls of stew, pouring water, offering seconds without judgment. For the first few minutes, Evan worked mechanically, his mind elsewhere. But then, something shifted. A man with weathered hands and a gray beard approached the counter. He wore a faded army jacket with a missing button, his eyes bright but tired. "Hey, brother," the man said kindly. "Smells great." Evan found himself smiling genuinely this time. "It's not bad," he said, handing over a bowl. "Hot, at least." The man laughed softly. Hot is heaven out there. Their eyes met briefly, and something in that exchange, a simple, human connection, hit Evan deeper than he expected. There was gratitude there, but also dignity, the kind he'd stopped recognizing in people long ago. As the evening went on, he started noticing more. The young mother quietly splitting her portion so her son could eat more. The old man who offered his bread to someone newer in line. The teenager helping an elderly woman carry her tray. None of them had money, fancy clothes, or anything close to comfort. Yet the way they treated each other with respect, patience, and humor was something he rarely saw in the Aurelia's marble dining room. For the first time in years, Evan wasn't counting tips. He wasn't faking smiles or measuring worth. He was just serving. And it felt right. He realized he'd forgotten what that felt like. By the end of the night, Evan's back ached and his hands smelled like onions, but he felt lighter than he had in years. The noise of the kitchen had turned into a kind of rhythm, volunteers laughing, plates clinking, stories being shared across tables. It was messy and loud, but it was real. There were no polished smiles or fake compliments here, just people helping people survive another day. During cleanup, he worked alongside a man named Raymond, a retired bus driver who volunteered every Tuesday. Raymond hummed an old blues tune while scrubbing pans. "You get used to it," he said, nodding toward the dining hall. "All the faces, all the stories. Teaches you a thing or two about grace." Evan smiled faintly. "Yeah, I think I'm the one learning the most here." Raymond chuckled. "Ain't that the truth? Folks think they come here to give, but most end up receiving something they didn't know they needed." Those words lingered long after the lights dimmed. As Evan stepped outside, the night air was cool and damp. He could still hear laughter drifting from inside. For the first time, he didn't rush home. He stood beneath the flickering streetlight, hands in his pockets, thinking about what Raymond said. He'd spent years serving people who measured everything in dollars and appearances. But here, no one cared what you wore or how much you tipped. What mattered was warmth, food, and kindness. The next morning, he showed up again, this time without being asked. The woman at the front desk smiled knowingly. "Back already? I figured I could help with breakfast." Soon he was cracking eggs and passing out toast. He learned names, faces, and stories. There was Nora, who'd lost her job but never stopped bringing flowers for the counter. There was Benny, a young man sketching on napkins while waiting for his meal, dreaming of being an artist again. And there was Sam, the same veteran he'd served the first night, sitting at his usual spot by the window. When the rush slowed, Sam waved him over. "You're new, huh?" "Yeah," Evan said. "Trying to do something good for once." Sam smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "You're doing fine, son. You treated me like a person today. That's rare." The words hit harder than any paycheck ever had. Evan didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. "Thank you," he said quietly. As Sam returned to his meal, Evan turned toward the kitchen, eyes stinging. That one sentence, "you treated me like a person," echoed through him like an awakening. He realized this was what had been missing all along. Not approval, not validation, just the simple act of seeing people. Evan stayed late that night, helping mop the floor after everyone had left. The smell of soup and detergent lingered, and for once, he didn't mind it. His body was tired, but his heart felt full. The silence of the empty dining hall was peaceful, not lonely. It was the first quiet he'd earned in years. He sat for a moment at one of the long wooden tables, running a finger over the scratches carved into it, small marks left by years of people coming through, eating, talking, existing. Every one of those marks was a story, and now he felt like part of it. He thought about Keanu again, about that calm gaze, that patience, that choice to give kindness where it wasn't deserved. Maybe that moment had led him here. Maybe it had broken something in him, but in the breaking, he'd started to rebuild. He looked around at the empty chairs, imagining the faces he'd seen that night, the smiles, the gratitude, the humanity. It was messy, imperfect, real, and it mattered. He realized then that he didn't want to go back to the Aurelia, not to luxury, not to performance. He wanted this, to serve people who saw him, not as a waiter, but as a person. For the first time in a long time, Evan smiled. Not the professional smile he'd worn for years, but something genuine, something peaceful. He whispered softly to himself, "This is what I was meant to do." It took Evan 2 full weeks before he found the courage to write the letter. The idea had followed him everywhere on the bus rides home, during quiet nights at the soup kitchen, even in the middle of conversations. Every time he thought he'd moved on, that moment with Keanu replayed like a silent film in the back of his mind. The kindness, the calm, the line that changed everything. Kindness isn't a reward. It's a choice. One evening, he sat at his small kitchen table with a cheap ballpoint pen and a blank sheet of paper. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. He stared at the page for a long time before finally writing the first word. Dear Mr. Reeves. He paused, the ink smudging slightly beneath his fingers. He had no idea how to start an apology to a man who had already forgiven him without saying a word. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized it wasn't about expecting forgiveness. It was about gratitude. He began again. I don't know if this letter will ever reach you. Maybe it'll get lost in a stack of fan mail, or maybe someone will throw it away before you see it. But I needed to write it anyway, because you changed something in me that night, and you deserve to know. His handwriting was uneven at first. His thoughts tangled. But as the words came, his sentences grew steadier. I judged you. I saw your clothes, your simplicity, and assumed I knew who you were. I treated you like someone unworthy of respect, when in truth, I was the one who'd lost mine. You didn't argue. You didn't humiliate me. You just showed me grace. And that grace cracked something open in me that had been closed for a long time. He stopped, his throat tightening. For a moment, he just sat there, letting the pen rest on the table. Then, slowly, he continued. I've spent years chasing tips, validation, and approval. I forgot why I ever loved serving people in the first place. You reminded me that service isn't about status. It's about humanity, about seeing people, not judging them. He looked over what he'd written so far, then leaned back, exhaling shakily. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Every word came from the part of him that had woken up since that night. And for the first time since it happened, he felt ready to forgive himself. Evan set the pen down for a moment and rubbed his temples. He hadn't realized how heavy writing could feel, how much truth weighed when it came from the heart. Outside, the city lights flickered across the walls of his small apartment, and the sound of distant traffic filled the silence. He looked back at the letter and continued writing. I wanted you to know that I took your lessons seriously. I started volunteering at a community kitchen downtown. At first, it was out of guilt, but after a few days, I realized it was something more. I met people who had nothing yet carried themselves with more dignity than half the guests I used to serve. They reminded me of you, humble, kind, quietly strong. He paused again, staring at the page. The words flowed easier now. One of the men I served told me, "You treated me like a person today." That's rare. I don't think I'll ever forget that. It made me realize how blind I'd become. I used to believe success was about the size of a tip or the price of a meal. Now I know it's about moments like that, the ones that make you human again. His hand trembled slightly as he wrote the next lines. I've spent most of my life pretending to understand humility, but the truth is, I didn't, not until I saw yours. You had every reason to be angry with me that night, and instead, you chose kindness. You reminded me that grace doesn't shout, it doesn't humiliate. It simply stands still and lets truth do the talking. He took a deep breath and wiped a small blot of ink that had bled near the edge of the paper. Since that night, I've been trying to live differently. I still make mistakes, but I see people now. I really see them. Every face I serve reminds me that I can choose to be better. You gave me that chance without even knowing it. Evan looked at the half-finished page, his eyes damp. Then he wrote the line that had been sitting in his heart for weeks. Your silence that night taught me more than any lecture ever could. You reminded me that grace doesn't need applause. When he read it back, the words hit him harder than he expected. It was the truth distilled to its purest form. Keanu hadn't spoken much that night, but his calm restraint had been louder than anger ever could be. Evan folded the letter halfway, but something inside him urged him to add more to tell the man how deeply that one moment had changed his entire view of life. He picked the pen back up. Evan continued writing. slower now, every line carrying the weight of the last few months. "I don't expect you to remember me," he wrote. "And honestly, I hope you don't. I'd rather be remembered for what I've learned than for what I did. You gave me a mirror that night, and what I saw wasn't pretty, but it was real. And that's what I needed. You showed me that character isn't measured by status or wealth, but by the way we treat people when no one's watching." He sat back, reading the letter from beginning to end. Every sentence felt like a confession, and a thank you rolled into one. He didn't edit it, he didn't polish it. It wasn't meant to impress, it was meant to release. Finally, he signed his name at the bottom. Sincerely, Evan Miller. He folded the letter carefully, slid it into an envelope, and wrote the address of Keanu's production company on the front. As he sealed it, he felt something inside him loosen, a weight he'd carried for months lifting quietly from his chest. The next morning, he dropped it into a blue mailbox on the corner, watching the envelope disappear into the slot. He knew it might never reach Keanu, or if it did, it might never be read, but that didn't matter. He had said what needed to be said. As he walked away, the early sun warmed his face, and for the first time since that night at the Aurelia, Evan felt free, not because he'd been forgiven, but because he'd finally learned how to forgive himself. It had been nearly 2 months since Evan mailed the letter. He hadn't expected a reply, and none came. But what did come was peace, quiet, gradual, and genuine. The guilt no longer crushed him. It had turned into something gentler, something that pushed him forward instead of holding him back. Most mornings, he still volunteered at Hope Haven, but on this particular Wednesday, he came home to a voicemail. The voice on the other end was warm and casual. "Hi, Evan. My name's Claire. I run a little cafe in Pasadena called the Oak Table. One of our suppliers volunteers with you at the soup kitchen and told me about the work you've been doing. We're opening a second location, and I'd love to talk to you about helping us manage it." Evan listened twice before it sank in. Someone had noticed him, not the old version of him, but the one trying to do better. He called back that afternoon. Claire's voice was steady and kind, the kind of person who sounded like she smiled while speaking. "We're not fancy," she told him. "We just try to make people feel at home. I heard that's something you're good at." The interview was more of a conversation over coffee. The cafe was small, filled with mismatched chairs, hand-painted mugs, and the smell of baked bread. A chalkboard by the door read, "Take what you need, give what you can." Evan didn't realize he was smiling until Claire noticed. "I can see you get it," she said simply. "We're not looking for perfect, we're looking for heart." When she offered him the job, it wasn't with a handshake, but with a hug. "Welcome to the Oak Table family," she said. That night, Evan sat in his car for a long time before starting the engine. It wasn't a luxurious restaurant or a high-paying position, but for the first time in his life, it felt like enough. He began work the following week. The first day, he arrived early to unlock the doors. The sunlight poured through the front windows, dust catching in the golden air. He looked around the empty space, bare tables, quiet ovens, and felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. He hung his apron on a hook by the counter and took a deep breath. "All right," he whispered to himself. "Let's make this place feel like home." In the weeks that followed, the Oak Table slowly transformed from a small cafe into something bigger. A place that felt alive. Evan poured his heart into every corner. He sanded down the wooden tables until they gleamed, hung new lights with his own hands, and painted the walls a warm honey color that caught the morning sun. But more than the decor, it was the energy that changed. The moment someone walked through the door, they felt seen. He trained the new staff himself. Most of them were young, just starting out, eager but nervous. On their first day, Evan gathered them around a long counter and said, "We're not just serving food here, we're serving people. No one who walks through that door is less than us, no matter what they wear or what they order. Got it?" They nodded, some shyly, some with wide smiles. To make sure the message stuck, he added a small wooden plaque to the wall above the register. It read, "No one is above kindness." He carved it himself one quiet evening after closing, using an old wood-burning pen he found in a thrift store. When he hung it up, he stood back for a long time, staring at it, feeling like it summed up everything he'd learned. The cafe quickly became a haven for all kinds of people. Students with half-finished essays, construction workers in dusty boots, retirees who came for the company as much as the coffee. Evan greeted everyone by name, remembered their usual orders, and never hurried anyone out the door. Sometimes he'd think back to the Aurelia, the gleaming tables, the expensive wines, the guests who snapped their fingers for service, and he realized something profound. Wealth wasn't always measured in money. Here, in this small place, surrounded by laughter, kindness, and imperfect humanity, he finally felt rich. By the third month, the oak table had found its rhythm. Word spread quickly. There was something special about the little cafe in Pasadena, where everyone felt like they belonged. Customers often stayed longer than planned, chatting with strangers, laughing with staff, leaving small notes of gratitude on napkins. One morning, as Evan wiped down a table by the window, a man in a business suit and a woman in a mechanic's uniform sat beside each other, both sipping coffee, both smiling. He paused and watched them for a moment. In any other place, they might never have spoken. Here, they were just people, sharing warmth. Maria visited one weekend, walking in with her familiar gentle smile. "You did it," she said, looking around the room. "You made something good out of that night." Evan nodded, his eyes soft. "Keanu taught me something I couldn't have learned any other way. I just didn't realize it until now." She looked at the wooden sign on the wall. "No one is above kindness." "You think he'd like it?" she asked. Evan smiled. "I don't think he needs to. It's already a part of him." When she left, Evan stood behind the counter, watching sunlight spill across the floorboards. The cafe buzzed softly with life, but inside him, there was only stillness, peace, humble and real. For the first time, he didn't feel like a waiter, or a failure, or a man trying to make up for his past. He just felt human. It was a late Thursday afternoon at the oak table, the kind of day that hummed softly between the rushes. The cafe smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon, sunlight stretching through the front windows in thin, golden lines. Evan was behind the counter, refilling sugar jars and humming to the quiet tune playing from the radio. Life had fallen into rhythm, predictable, peaceful. The doorbell chimed, and he looked up. A man entered wearing a baseball cap and dark sunglasses, casual jeans, a plain black t-shirt. Nothing unusual in Pasadena. Half the town wore something like that. The stranger walked slowly to the counter, his steps unhurried, his presence calm. "Hey there," Evan greeted with his usual warmth. "Welcome to the oak table. What can I get started for you?" The man's voice was soft but familiar. "Just a coffee. Black." Evan smiled, coming right up. He turned to grab a mug, filling it with fresh brew from the pot that had just finished. When he placed it on the counter, the stranger lifted his sunglasses slightly, just enough for their eyes to meet. Evan froze. It took a heartbeat to recognize him, then another, to process that the man standing right in front of him ordering a simple black coffee was Keanu Reeves. Keanu gave a small, knowing smile, one corner of his mouth lifting the same way it had that night at the Aurelia. Evan's hands went still on the counter. I didn't expect." Keanu raised a hand gently, stopping him before he could fumble further. "Neither did I," he said. "But someone told me this place makes good coffee." Evan laughed, breathless, trying to hide the tremor in his voice. "It's decent. Depends on who makes it." Keanu chuckled softly. "Then I think I'm in good hands." Evan poured a second cup without thinking and set it down across from him. "You, want to sit?" Keanu nodded, and together they moved to the corner table by the window, the same table Evan usually sat at. After closing, the air between them felt different from before, lighter, quieter, but charged with unspoken memory. Evan tried to find words, but they didn't come easily. All the things he'd wanted to say in that letter suddenly felt too small. He finally spoke. "I never thought I'd see you again." Keanu stirred his coffee with a small spoon. Life's funny that way. The sound of the spoon tapping against the cup filled the pause between them, a rhythm steady enough to calm Evan's racing heart. For a moment, they sat in silence, both sipping coffee as sunlight filtered through the window. The noise of the cafe faded into a gentle hum, cups clinking, quiet laughter from a nearby table, the sound of the espresso machine sighing in the background. Evan finally broke the silence. "I don't know if you ever got my letter," he said carefully. "I sent it months ago. Didn't expect a response, but I needed to say it." Keanu looked up, his expression unreadable at first, then softened into something almost paternal. "I did," he said. "It found me eventually." Evan blinked, surprised. "You read it?" Keanu nodded. Every word. He leaned back in his chair, the faintest smile touching his lips. "You wrote that grace doesn't need applause. That's true, but sometimes grace deserves acknowledgement, so here I am." Evan's chest tightened, his throat thick. "I didn't deserve your kindness that night." Keanu shook his head gently. "You didn't have to. That's the whole point." He took another slow sip of coffee. Eyes calm, but kind. "I wasn't angry at you, Evan. I've seen people treat others worse over far less. But what mattered wasn't that night, it's what came after. I heard about what you're doing here." Evan frowned slightly. "You heard about this place?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Word gets around. People notice when a restaurant feels different." He gestured toward the room. The easy laughter, the mismatched furniture, the warmth that seemed to breathe through the walls. "You built something honest. That's rare." Evan looked down, his voice quiet. "I just wanted to make a place where no one feels small. Not like I made you feel that night." Keanu nodded. "And that's exactly why you're forgiven." The words sank deep, slow, and steady, like sunlight through glass. Evan swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "You're too kind, Mr. Reeves." Keanu gave a soft chuckle. "Kindness isn't a reward, remember?" They both laughed lightly at that. An echo of the past turned into something tender. After a while, Keanu glanced toward the wall where the wooden plaque hung. "No one is above kindness," he read aloud. "That's yours?" Evan nodded. "Carved it myself." Keanu's eyes lingered on the words for a moment, then returned to Evan. "It suits you. And it suits this place." Evan smiled faintly. "You're the reason it exists." Keanu set his cup down, his expression thoughtful. "No," he said softly, "you are." The simplicity of it struck harder than any speech could. Evan didn't reply. He just let the silence between them settle into something whole, something healing. They sat for a while longer, talking about ordinary things, music, food, the strange calm of growing older. Keanu listened more than he spoke, as he always did, and Evan found himself laughing in a way he hadn't in years. It didn't feel like a conversation between a movie star and a former waiter. It felt like two men who understood something about the world and about grace. When the cafe began to fill again, Keanu glanced at the clock and stood. Evan rose with him. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "Not just for today, for everything." Keanu smiled. "You already did, in the way you live now." He reached for a napkin on the counter, picked up a pen from the tip jar, and wrote a few words before slipping on his sunglasses. He left cash beside his empty cup and gave Evan one last nod before stepping outside into the afternoon light. When Evan finally looked down at the napkin, his hands trembled. Written in Keanu's unmistakable handwriting were the words, "Keep serving hearts, not wallets." Evan pressed the napkin flat against the counter, reading it again and again until the ink nearly blurred. He looked around the cafe at the people laughing, at the plaque on the wall, at the light streaming in from the windows, and smiled. Keanu had walked out the door, but somehow he was still there. 2 weeks after Keanu's visit, life at the oak table carried on quietly. Evan didn't tell anyone about what had happened that afternoon. The napkin stayed pinned behind the counter, tucked just below the wooden sign that read, "No one is above kindness." Customers noticed it sometimes, but they only saw a few words scrawled in neat handwriting. None knew who had written them, and Evan preferred it that way. One bright Monday morning, a woman in her early 30s walked into the cafe carrying a camera and a small notepad. Her name was Jasmine Cole, a journalist who wrote for a lifestyle column that focused on community stories. "Hi," she said cheerfully. I'm working on a feature about small restaurants making a big impact. Someone told me this place has a story worth telling. Evan hesitated for a moment, unsure. I don't know if we're that interesting, he said modestly. Jasmine smiled. That's what they all say. Mind if I ask a few questions? Within minutes, she had her coffee and a seat near the window. They talked as the morning light poured across the tables. She asked about the cafe's mission, about the sign on the wall, and about why so many people seemed to feel at home here. Evan told her the truth, the short version. How he'd once worked at a high-end restaurant that valued appearances over people. How a moment of shame had changed him. How he wanted to create a place that did the opposite. Jasmine listened intently, writing fast but never interrupting. And the quote on the napkin? She asked, glancing toward it. It looks personal. Evan hesitated, his gaze softening. It's from someone who reminded me what kindness really means. I'd rather not say who. She nodded respectfully. Sometimes mystery makes a story stronger. Before she left, she took a few photos of the cafe, the mismatched tables, the laughter at the counter, the sign above the register. As she waved goodbye, she said, "This place has heart, Evan. People need to hear about it." Evan didn't think much of it afterward. The lunch rush came, and the hours passed. But 3 days later, the story appeared online with the headline, "Pasadena Cafe redefines hospitality, one act of kindness at a time." The second described the oak table as a haven of equality and warmth. And near the end, one quiet line stood out. A well-known visitor once left behind a handwritten message that guides the cafe to this day. Keep serving hearts, not wallets. By noon, the article had started making its rounds online. At first, Evan didn't notice. The cafe was busy, filled with its usual mix of regulars and newcomers. Then one of the baristas, Ellie, approached the counter, phone in hand, eyes wide. "Evan, you're trending," she said, half laughing. "Like actually trending." He frowned, wiping his hands on a towel. "Trending? What do you mean?" She turned the screen toward him. There it was, the article from Local Light Journal, already shared thousands of times. Dozens of comments flooded the page, filled with words like hope, grace, and inspiration. People were tagging friends, writing things like, "This is what real success looks like, and humanity needs more places like this cafe." Evan scrolled down slowly, stunned. Beneath the photo of the cafe's interior was a close-up of the napkin. Jasmine had blurred the signature, but the words were clear. Keep serving hearts, not wallets. The comments below exploded with speculation. "I swear that handwriting looks like Keanu Reeves's. Only Keanu would leave a message like that. He probably stopped by in disguise. Sounds just like him. This man turned his life around because of an act of kindness. That's the most Keanu thing ever." Within hours, major outlets picked it up. Blogs, entertainment pages, even a few celebrity fan sites reposted the article. Hashtags like #KeepServingHearts and #KeanuKindness trended on social media. Maria called him that evening. "Evan," she said, half laughing, half emotional, "I just saw your face on a news segment. They're calling you the Kindness Cafe guy." Evan rubbed his forehead, overwhelmed. "I didn't want this to turn into a story about fame." Maria's voice softened. "It's not about fame. It's about redemption. People see that. They see how much you've changed." The next day, customers poured in. Some just to see the cafe they'd read about, others to leave thank you notes. One man handed Evan a folded piece of paper with the words, "You made me believe in good people again." A woman whispered through tears, "My son's a waiter. I showed him your story." The air in the oak table felt different, charged with something beautiful but humbling. Evan watched it all quietly, greeting each person with the same calm gratitude. He didn't brag, didn't post about it, didn't even tell anyone about Keanu's visit. He just kept doing what he'd promised, serving hearts, not wallets. By the end of the week, the cafe's front window was filled with notes, drawings, and small thank you cards taped to the glass. Each one carried a story of its own. Evan looked at them every morning before unlocking the door, realizing that kindness had a way of multiplying when you least expected it. A week later, a TV crew showed up at the oak table asking for a short interview. Evan politely declined, saying, "The story isn't about me. It's about what we all can be." His humility only made the piece more powerful when it aired that night, ending with a clip of the wooden sign above his counter, "No one is above kindness." The next morning, the cafe line stretched down the block. But the people weren't there for selfies or fame. They were there because something in the story had touched them. They wanted to be part of the feeling, to sit in a place where kindness was real. An older man left a $50 bill on the counter with a note, "For the next person who can't afford lunch." A young mother donated free meals for veterans. A teenager brought his friends after school, telling them, "This place is proof people can change." Evan never once mentioned Keanu's name, but everyone seemed to know. The mystery made it sacred, an unspoken truth carried in the way people treated one another. Online, the comments kept pouring in. Only Keanu could teach a lesson like this. He changes lives without trying. The world needs more Evans and more Keanus. Evan read a few, smiling faintly, then turned off his phone and looked around the cafe. The smell of coffee, the laughter, the light, it all felt like grace made visible. He realized then that redemption doesn't come from being forgiven. It comes from living differently once you are, and that was exactly what he intended to keep doing. A month after the article went viral, the world began to move on, as it always does. But inside the oak table, something had changed forever. The cafe wasn't just a business anymore. It had become a quiet refuge for kindness. People came not for fame, but for peace. They brought stories, gratitude, and sometimes tears. Evan often found himself standing by the front door before opening, looking out at the sidewalk lined with morning light. Each day felt like another chance to make things right. Yet, something in him wanted to leave a message, not for attention, but as a reminder for anyone who walked through his door. One evening, after the cafe closed and the last of the cups were washed, he stayed behind. He brought out a small piece of reclaimed wood he'd been saving. Its surface was rough, the grain uneven, but it felt honest. He set it on the counter beside his carving tools. He thought about that night at the Aurelia. The arrogance, the bitterness, the single moment that had rewritten his life. Then he thought about Keanu's words, the napkin, the quiet power of restraint. He took a pencil and began to trace the first letters slowly. Judge no one by their cover. He paused after the last word, running a thumb across the faint graphite lines. Then, below it, in smaller, delicate script, he wrote, "Dedicated to the man who showed me what grace looks like." As he began carving, the rhythmic scrape of the tool against the wood echoed softly through the empty cafe. Each stroke felt like a meditation, each letter a confession. When he finished, the surface glowed faintly under the overhead light. Imperfect, yet beautiful. The next morning he mounted it above the entrance, high enough to catch the sunlight that streamed through the front windows. For a while, he just stood there, looking up at it. Customers began to notice the new addition that day. Some smiled, others took photos, a few asked about the story behind it, but Evan always gave the same gentle answer. Just something I learned the hard way. He didn't need to explain more. The sign spoke for itself, and every time he looked at it, he felt a calmness he hadn't known before. It wasn't pride, exactly. It was peace, the quiet kind that comes after learning who you truly are. As the days passed, the plaque became more than decoration. It became the cafe's heartbeat. Regular customers began to glance at it when they entered, some even touching the edge for luck. A few parents pointed it out to their children, reading the words aloud like a small prayer. Judge no one by their cover. Simple, but it stayed with people. One morning, a delivery driver came in, dusty from work, and paused beneath the plaque before ordering his coffee. "That sign," he said to Evan with a grin, "makes me feel welcome before I even get to the counter." Evan smiled softly. "That's what it's for." The stories continued, people from all walks of life sharing quiet moments under those words. A woman who'd been turned away from fancier places said this cafe felt like home. A group of college kids left a note saying the sign made them rethink how they treated strangers. Evan never claimed credit. Whenever someone asked who the dedication was for, he would just glance at the napkin still pinned behind the counter and say, "Someone who taught me what patience looks like." He didn't say Keanu's name, because he didn't have to. The grace Keanu showed that night lived on in everything. The warmth of the staff, the humility in service, the kindness that lingered in the air. And for Evan, the plaque wasn't a reminder of guilt anymore. It was a promise. Months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Evan arrived early to open the cafe. The city was still half asleep, and the first rays of sunlight spilled across the sign above the door. The golden light made the carved words glow, almost as if they were alive. He stood there for a moment, hands in his apron pockets, letting the stillness sink in. He thought about the long road that had led him here, the arrogance, the fall, the letter, and the unexpected mercy that had reshaped him. What once filled him with shame now filled him with gratitude. The man who had once measured life in tips and status now measured it in smiles and peace. When the first customers came in, he greeted them with his usual warmth, the kind that came from somewhere deep and real. He noticed one woman stop by the doorway, reading the plaque before stepping inside. She turned to him and said softly, "That's a beautiful message." Evan nodded. "It saved me once." She smiled and took a seat near the window. The day began, full of laughter and light. Every time Evan looked up at the plaque, he saw more than words. He saw a journey, one that had started with judgment and ended in grace. And beneath it all, he felt the quiet presence of the man who had once sat at his table, eating a simple burger and reminding the world that kindness doesn't need a spotlight. Evan didn't need applause or recognition anymore. He had something better. He had peace. A year passed faster than Evan could believe. The little cafe that once served as a quiet refuge had grown into something much larger. What started as one small corner shop in Pasadena had now become 3 locations across Los Angeles, each one built on the same principle carved into that wooden plaque: judge no one by their cover. But growth hadn't come from ambition or profit. It had come from purpose. The Oak Table Cafe had become a gathering place for everyone: construction workers on their lunch break, teachers grading papers, artists sketching ideas, and even retired couples who just wanted to sit somewhere warm. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't trendy, but it was real. And people could feel it. Evan's days were busier now, but he moved through them differently. He no longer rushed through orders or counted the seconds between customers. Every interaction mattered. He remembered what it felt like to be unseen, to be dismissed, and he made sure no one felt that way in his restaurant. When he opened the second location, he made a decision that surprised his investors. He partnered with 2 local nonprofits that helped at-risk youth and foster kids transition into the workforce. The cafe would not only serve coffee and food, it would serve as a place of opportunity. Young people came in with no experience, nervous and unsure. Evan trained them personally, not just on how to balance trays or greet customers, but how to listen, to look people in the eye, to understand that service wasn't servitude, it was connection. The program worked better than anyone expected. Some of the teens who once doubted their worth began finding purpose in small moments: a smile from a customer, a thank you note from a stranger, a compliment from Evan after a long shift. For many of them, this wasn't just a job. It was their first real chance at belonging. Evan kept Maria by his side through it all. She had retired from fine dining to help him train the new staff. She often told people, "This cafe doesn't teach you how to serve food. It teaches you how to serve hearts." And every time she said it, Evan smiled. Because that was exactly what Keanu had told him on that napkin. And those words had become the foundation of everything he built. The transformation didn't go unnoticed. Culinary schools began inviting Evan to speak about his journey, how a single moment of humility had reshaped his entire life. At first, he hesitated. He wasn't a public speaker. But Maria insisted, reminding him that the story wasn't about him. It was about what kindness could do when pride stepped aside. Standing on those small auditorium stages, Evan would look at rows of eager faces, students dreaming of Michelin stars, fame, and glittering careers. He would smile gently before beginning. "I used to want all that too," he'd tell them, "until I learned that the most expensive thing you can lose in this business is your kindness." The words always landed with silence. Some students looked puzzled. Others nodded slowly, understanding something deeper. Evan didn't lecture about food or technique. He spoke about people, about the weight of a smile, the power of listening, and how a single act of grace could turn an entire life around. After every talk, a few students would stay behind, waiting quietly to shake his hand. "I needed to hear that," they'd say. And each time, Evan would feel a small, familiar warmth, like the ripple of a kindness that had never stopped spreading since that night at the Aurelia. After one of those talks, a student approached Evan with tears in her eyes. She said she worked as a waitress on weekends and had once mocked a customer who seemed poor. "I didn't know how wrong I was until now," she confessed. Evan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder and said, "You just learned the same lesson I did, only faster. That means you'll go farther." Moments like that reminded him why he kept telling the story. It wasn't about shame anymore. It was about passing forward the grace that had once been shown to him. By late spring, the third Oak Table Cafe opened in Santa Monica. Reporters came again, curious about the Kindness Cafe chain, but Evan never let it become about headlines. He refused to trademark the motto or turn it into a brand. "It's not mine to own," he'd say. "It belongs to everyone who's ever learned to look twice before judging." He spent his mornings visiting each location, greeting staff by name, sharing small words of encouragement, and checking the plaques that hung by every door. Each cafe carried the same phrase, carved from the same wood: "Judge no one by their cover." And below each one, the quiet dedication remained: "To the man who showed me what grace looks like." Sometimes, customers would catch him staring at the sign and ask who it was for. Evan always smiled and said, "A teacher who didn't need a classroom." When he locked up at night, he often thought about how different his life could have been if Keanu hadn't walked into that restaurant in a gray t-shirt that night. The thought still humbled him. Kindness, he realized, had built everything he loved. And though Keanu's name wasn't on the cafe walls, his spirit lived in every cup served, every laugh shared, and every second chance given. Evan no longer dreamed of owning a fine dining empire. He dreamed of leaving behind a legacy of gentleness. One coffee, one plate, one heart at a time. The evening quiet settled over Pasadena, warm and golden as the last light filtered through the front windows of the Oak Table Cafe. The chatter was gone, the chairs were stacked, and the air smelled faintly of roasted beans and vanilla. Evan moved from table to table, wiping the last traces of the day from the wooden surfaces. He liked closing time. It reminded him of how far things had come. He paused by the counter, where the framed napkin still hung behind the glass. The ink had faded a little, but the words were still clear. "Keep serving hearts, not wallets." He ran a finger along the edge of the frame and smiled. Outside, the street was calm. The hum of traffic had quieted, replaced by the soft rhythm of footsteps from late-night walkers. He locked the door, turned off the sign, and stepped back. Above him, the plaque caught a glimmer from the streetlight. Those same words that started it all: "Judge no one by their cover." He stood there for a moment, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the reflection of the cafe windows shimmer in the glass. He remembered everything: the shame, the regret, the moment of awakening that had changed the course of his life. It all led here. As he walked down the block toward his car, his thoughts turned to the people who had shaped him. Maria, who'd shown him what patience looked like. The kids from the program, who taught him courage in small doses every day. And, of course, Keanu the man, whose calm silence had been louder than any lecture could ever be. In his mind, Evan could still see that night clearly. The wrinkled t-shirt, the quiet dignity, the grace under judgment. It wasn't the kind of memory that faded. It was the kind that grew roots. He looked up at the sky before getting in the car. "Thank you," he whispered softly, as though the stars themselves might carry the message to wherever Keanu was. Then he drove home in peaceful silence, unaware that on the other side of the city, the man who had changed, everything was about to receive a message that would bring their story full circle. Across town, the night stretched quiet over Los Angeles. Keanu Reeves walked alone down a side street near the edge of Silver Lake, wearing his usual gray jacket and well-worn boots. The city hummed softly around him, alive but subdued. He liked these hours, the moments when fame faded and he could simply exist like everyone else. He stopped at a small corner market, bought a bottle of water, and exchanged a polite nod with the cashier. No one recognized him, and that was how he preferred it. Being unseen had its peace. As he stepped back into the cool air, his phone buzzed. It was a message from one of his charity partners, the same organization that managed donations for food programs across the city. The message was short, but caught his attention immediately. "Hey Keanu, just wanted to let you know Evans Cafe is now sponsoring free weekly meals for underprivileged families. Thought you'd want to know." Keanu read the message twice, standing still under the dim glow of a streetlight. A quiet smile formed at the corner of his mouth. He typed back 2 simple words, "Proud of him." Then he slipped the phone into his pocket and started walking again. The sidewalk glistened faintly after a light drizzle. Passing a bus stop, Keanu noticed a man in a worn jacket sleeping on the bench. Without hesitation, he took a folded bill from his wallet and tucked it gently beside the man's bag, making sure not to wake him. He didn't need to be thanked. He never did. Further down the street, a couple recognized him, whispering his name under their breath, but Keanu simply gave them a nod and kept walking. He didn't want applause, he wanted quiet. As the night breeze moved through the trees, he thought about the cafe in Pasadena, the one that used to be just an idea in a stranger's mind. It was funny how life worked. Sometimes a single act of kindness, one that no one else even saw, could change everything. He looked up at the sky, a faint crescent moon hanging over the city, and whispered to himself, he figured it out. Then, with that same calm smile, Keanu disappeared down the street, blending into the rhythm of the night. Back at the Oak Table Cafe, the lights were off, but the message above the door still caught the glow of passing headlights. Judge no one by their cover. Inside, the air was still, but it held warmth, memories of laughter, forgiveness, and second chances. On the counter, the framed napkin reflected the soft shimmer of the street outside. In that silence, the story had come full circle. A man once blinded by pride had learned to see again, and the one who had taught him had done so without a word of judgment, only with grace. Keanu walking under the faint halo of a streetlight, his figure calm against the night. His phone buzzed once more with a brief reply. "You started something beautiful." He smiled, the kind of quiet smile that carried peace rather than pride.